Welcome to ShadowTalk, a cybersecurity podcast powered by ReliaQuest, the leader in agentic AI security operations. I'm Brandon and Tirado, Director of Gray Matter Operations.
And I'm Tehman, Senior Manager of Gray Matter Operations. Welcome to our first episode of 2026.
Today we're diving into ransomware groups, how they evolve, adapt, and keep coming back stronger, and what you do to proactively defend your organization.
The part most organizations miss is that disruption alone doesn't solve this. These groups regenerate, they change tactics, and a lot of security teams are still reacting when they could be defending proactively.
So over the next 25 minutes, we're going to break down what's actually happening across the top ransomware groups, where security teams tend to fall short, and what proactive defense really looks like in practice.
So let's start with the headline everyone saw and why it's not the full story.
So December 2025, LockBit names 100 organizations on their data leak site. I'm sure most of our listeners have seen this, and that's the highest monthly count that they've posted since Operation Kronos, which took them down in February of 2024. And for context, LockBit named 80 victims in December 2023, 5 victims in 2024, and 100 in December 2025. So what this is showing is this is not residual activity, this is reacceleration. And that's why the hook kind of writes itself, because while LockBit has been rebuilding, Qilin hits 992 targets in 2025, Akira 610, Clop 512, and that's more than 2,100 victims from just these three groups without even counting LockBit. Our reporting is also indicating that when comparing 2023 to 2025, the names and victims year over year has grown nearly 60%. And so the real story isn't necessarily if one group is going to come back. The real story here is, despite law enforcement disrupting LockBit and other ransomware groups, these operations never disrupt the ransomware as a service model. They're just redistributing the market. And the ecosystem has evolved fast. Again, our analysis that roughly 80% of ransomware as a service platforms are now offering automation or AI-enhanced tooling to their affiliates. Groups invested in the speed, they've invested in scale, and the result is really brutal. Breakout times to encryption, and time to exfiltration are down to sub 20 minutes. Again, in short, if your response workflows are taking hours or even days, you're not responding, you're unfortunately recovering. So because in 2026, the theme here is this isn't our tools versus their tools when we're talking about the adversary. It's our automation versus their automation. And that's what we're going to break down today. How the ransomware as a service ecosystem has industrialized what the fastest groups are doing right now and what it really takes to defend at machine speed. So Tehman, help us set the stage. When did this shift really start, and what's changed after some notable law enforcement disruptions like Operation Kronos?
Great question. As we talk through the current trajectory of ransomware operators, I want to start with a look back on how major ransomware as a service groups have industrialized around automation and commoditization, and how their business model has matured and become more efficient. We're going to first start by looking back at 2023. The theme here was dominance through manual operations. As we know, in 2023, LockBit dominated the market. About 25% of global ransomware incidents were attributed to this group. During this timeframe, models were centralized. It was one group, one command structure, and a single set of operators. Overall, these operators were very successful with their attacks, but their scalability was limited by the human capacity that they had. Going into 2024, the key theme here was disruption. Federal law enforcement took action. Indictments and arrests were a huge disruption in the ecosystem. Many expected the outcome to be a decline in ransomware as a service's overall operations, but what really happened was that groups didn't disappear. They were forced to automate. These disruptions from law enforcement accelerated the shift from manual operations to automated, more distributed ecosystems. A few examples of the automations that some of these teams utilized was using AI to add randomization to the ransomware execution methods, so tactics are unique per deployment. Another strategy they used was automatic selection of encryption modes to balance between speed and strength of the encryption. Now, going into mid-2024 and leading us to the present day, and we call this like the post-disruption evolution, groups that faced disruption during that time period were forced to industrialize. So we saw rebrands of operators such as LockBit 4.0. It's worth noting from our research, they haven't been very successful due to the overall number of compromised organizations being pretty low, mostly single-digit compromises per month, only a few scenarios where we saw that go into the double digits. Another piece to note is that affiliate networks have expanded and many affiliates moved to other groups like Qilin or Akira. A big stat from our research around ransomware tooling is that ransomware became more automated, with about 80% of ransomware as a service groups we analyzed are now offering automation or AI within their platform. Now, what are the two key impacts of this? One is that more configured attack methods, and this results in better speed and encryption strengths. And the other one is the execution cycles have greatly accelerated. As we know, breakout times are going from an average of 48 minutes to as quick as 18 minutes, which we reported on during Q3 of 2025. Next, leading up to December of 2025, the latter half of the year, especially leaning towards the end of the year, LockBit 5.0 launched in September of 2025, and they were heavily encryption focused. During December of 2025, we saw the highest number of organizations named by LockBit since the law enforcement takedowns we saw in 2024. Specifically, we saw 100 named in December alone. This spike in activity indicates re-acceleration, not residual activity. Based on prior years, LockBit has not waited until end of year to post their victims. For example, in 2024, they named 552 victims total, with only 5 named in December. Likewise, in 2023, they named 1,040 total, with 80 in December. Now, finally moving to the current state, we'll take a look at some of the top ransomware groups of 2025 and some of the key elements that have been driving their success. First, we're going to start with Qilin. They used vulnerability exploitation, often combined with automation, to bypass EDR tools. They were tied to about 992 organizations in 2025, with over 1,200 in total impacted. Akira used vulnerability exploitation, often through unknown assets, and also bypassed EDR tools, tied to about 610 organizations in 2025, and over 1,022 in total. Finally, Clop used vulnerability exploitation combined with automation, driving them to greater scale and speed. And they were data exfiltration focused only. They were tied to 512 organizations in 2025 and over 944 in total. As we progress into 2026, you're not defending against a specific threat group. You're defending against a mature, self-sustaining ransomware as a service ecosystem where groups have invested in automation and tactics are commoditized. The best way to defend is by seeing and understanding everything that might get attacked and gathering collective intelligence around attacks before they reach you, and then doing this process automatically.
Awesome. Appreciate that, Tehman. And now that you've gone ahead and set the stage for how the ecosystem industrialized, let's get a bit more concrete here, right? So if you want to understand why ransomware as a service keeps winning, we need to look at the top groups and what they're doing tactically. And more importantly, why those tactics keep working across thousands of organizations. So in 2025, 3 groups are a perfect snapshot of the modern ransomware as a service playbook. You had Qilin, you had Akira, and Clop. Different brands, different tooling, but the same underlying formula. Vulnerability exploitation, automation, and advanced evasion tools. And they consistently exploit the same 3 defender weaknesses: incomplete visibility, coverage gaps, and manual response. So let's start with Qilin. Their primary tactic is simple and repeatable. Hunt unpatched known vulnerabilities at scale, and then move fast enough that most teams never even catch up. And here's the pattern. Scan broadly, find exposed edge systems, exploit, and then use EDR bypass techniques to reduce logging and telemetry. They're not betting on magic. They're betting on the reality that patching is slow and visibility is incomplete. So a real example when talking about Qilin has been observed of exploiting critical Fortinet flaws impacting FortOS and FortiProxy SSL VPN devices like CVE 2024 21762 and CVE 2024 555591. And so bringing this home, why does this matter? Because of a lot of organizations here known vulnerability and assume it's already handled. But in the real world, vulnerability scanning is spotty. Patch cycles drag out, and edge devices are often treated like infrastructure, not like high-risk entry points. This maps directly to two of the big gaps: incomplete visibility, because you don't always know what's exposed, and manual response, because even when you do know, the organization's patch and response cycles aren't moving at attacker speed. Moving on to Akira, really what their bread and butter is unknown assets plus unmonitored coverage. So the sweet spot, as I like to call it, they're extremely efficient at finding devices that you didn't even realize were on your network, or devices no one is actively watching. So essentially when they're tending to move through areas where EDR is incomplete, misconfigured, or even disabled. And then they'll often utilize that legitimate admin tools so their activity blends into normal traffic. That's a brutal combination: low visibility plus high plausibility. A campaign tied to Akira has been linked to the exploitation of Sonic Wall SSL VPN. And we are continuously seeing this at ReliaQuest as early as this week. An improper access control issue in this vulnerability, and in particular dangerous, we've seen this emerge in M&A scenarios, because acquired offices are frequently bringing in devices like lower cost SSL VPN appliances that aren't fully inventoried or even monitored. So Akira wins here because the defender problem isn't just detection, it's also discovery. If you don't know you own it, you're not patching it, you're not monitoring it, and you're not responding to it. That's incomplete visibility and coverage gaps in their purest form. Finally, Clop. When I think Clop, I think managed file transfer solutions. I'm sure most of our listeners are as well. And again, this kind of resonates with really their bread and butter in scale and speed. So they're operating like an industrial campaign machine with hundreds of targets executed in parallel. Their primary tactic is often exfiltration, first extortion, and then the timeliness matters so that you can see data theft happening as little as 24 to 48 hours from initial access. And this really is groundbreaking, or really helps change the game, because exfiltration first removes uncertainty. They don't have to win with encryption to get paid. If they already have your data, the leverage is immediate. And what we've seen over the last few years is exactly this. Why go through a traditional ransomware campaign with encryption when I could just exfiltrate information and data and hold that hostage? And that's been shown to be able to prove out, or at least grab, a ransom demand. We saw them exploiting Oracle e-business suite this year. And again, the commonality here was the scale at which these operators were to do, similar to what we saw with much of the managed file transfer solutions that they've targeted in 2023, 2024, and obviously in 2025. So the common multiplier: automation plus public exploits plus discovery via AI. And that's exactly the direction we called out in our 2025 Q2 ransomware reporting, that these groups that scale are the ones that are automate discovery and exploitation. And it's not theoretical. Tools are emerging that are accelerating this exploit discovery and targeting, including AI-assisted platforms being used to find and operationalize vulnerabilities. Tooling, we're seeing bring your own vulnerable drivers that are essentially able to tap into Windows machines to unhook EDR technologies. And with Akira, ReliaQuest has recently observed an evolution in December alone, using a new Baidu, if I pronounced that correct, antivirus driver as part of bring your own vulnerable driver chain to gain, again, that kernel level permission to disable EDRs. So when you look at Qilin, Akira, Clop all together, the key insight is this: they don't need exotic 0 days or custom malware to win consistently. They exploit standard repeatable gaps that exist almost everywhere: incomplete visibility, coverage gaps, and manual response. The implication for defenders is huge. If Qilin is exploiting a patch today, or a path today, Clop will likely exploit something similar tomorrow. If Akira moves from an unknown asset, or proves an unknown asset are a reliable entry point, other groups are going to follow. So you're not defending anymore against unique group tactics. You're defending against standardized playbooks of sorts. This means intelligence about one group applies to others, and collective intelligence. What's happening across your industry directly improves your defenses. So where exactly is the defender losing this race?
ShadowTalk is brought to you by ReliaQuest, the global leader in AI cybersecurity. ReliaQuest helps enterprise cybersecurity teams contain threats in minutes with its agentic AI security operations platform, Gray Matter. ReliaQuest makes security possible for the most trusted enterprise brands in the world. Learn more at ReliaQuest.com.
Tehman, let's talk about some structural vulnerabilities inside most organizations that help make break-ins like these so repeatable.
Thanks, Brandon. So now that we've walked through what attackers are doing, let's talk about why it keeps working. We're going to walk through 4 structural vulnerabilities that lead to the biggest areas of risk for organizations and how major ransomware operators are exploiting each. We're going to start with vulnerability number 1, incomplete asset visibility. As we all know, you can't defend what you don't know you have. The problem here is that many teams don't know what they own. This includes unknown devices on the network, unmonitored accounts, shadow IT environments, cloud resources, APIs. Akira specifically is known to specifically target these unknown resources. Unknown devices means no visibility, no EDR, no logging, and for them, that's a free path from initial access to lateral movement. What makes this difficult to resolve is the devices connect without any sort of formal onboarding. Legacy systems stay alive well past end of life without any sort of documentation. And cloud infrastructure spins up and scales without traditional CMDB entry. The challenge that I have for the audience here is, could you print out a complete list of every device, every user account, every application, every API endpoint on your network right now? If not, you have this vulnerability. And if you don't, then groups such as Akira already know how to exploit it because the playbook has become standardized. Going into vulnerability number 2, coverage gaps. The problem here is even if visibility exists, monitoring is incomplete. EDR is not deployed everywhere. Logging is not ingesting from all the different systems. Vulnerability scanning is incomplete, and legacy systems still have outdated software. Qilin scans for unpatched vulnerabilities and systems without EDR. If found, they move through freely. With those EDR and logging gaps, it creates dark zones where they can operate with minimal risk of detection. Now, why does this exist in so many environments? EDR is expensive and hard to justify on low-risk systems. Logging volume is massive and continues to increase. Teams struggle with both ingestion and storage. Legacy systems also can't run without modern agents, so there is a level of risk that is assumed with these types of devices. Now, what's that impact for organizations? Even if you can detect a threat, you're not seeing the path attackers take. Detection is incomplete, and those blind spots still remain. Going into the third vulnerability, siloed intelligence. Collective intelligence never reaches your defenses automatically. The problem here is that threat intelligence does exist in so many different ways: internal detections, peer reports, threat feeds, law enforcement, vendors, but it never reaches your defenses automatically. It arrives as these types of reports, these IOC lists or advisories. One person reads it, someone else ingests it into a detection tool, and by the time that rule is written and deployed, the attack is already over. The next organization gets hit the exact same way, with that exact same tactic, and there's no sharing learned from one organization to the other. There's no collective defense. The reason this is the biggest problem is because tactics are commoditized. What Qilin does today, Clop will do tomorrow. What works against company A will then automatically work against company B. Manual action is needed for ingestion, testing, and deployment that leads to slowdown. Now, the final vulnerability. Manual response is too slow. Let's go through a manual workflow right now. You report on it, it goes to a detection engineer, they ingest the correct data, they do testing on the rule, they deploy the rule, and it's about, 5 to 21 days in total, whereas we know attackers' execution timeframes are happening within 24 to 48 hours. So let's actually take this one step deeper and see how this plays out for a security team. An initial threat is detected. Let's go with the example that a service account anomaly is seen, and we're seeing some initial lateral movement. This alert is escalated to a security team. That security team then authorizes some sort of response, whether that's isolating an asset, rotating credentials, doing something that was going to further block lateral movement, and the change control process is then invoked, waiting for another maintenance window. The response is then deployed 24 to 48 hours later, and by then the attacker has already exfiltrated data, established persistence, and moved on to the next target. The major impact here is that this speed disadvantage compounds every single minute. Attackers have this time to establish persistence before you've even isolated the compromised asset. Ask yourself this: if we detect a threat right now, how long until we isolate it, then rotate credentials, and then block that lateral movement? If the answer is hours or days, attackers have already moved in a 24 to 48 hour window. The underlying pattern here is that every environment learns the hard way. If two environments are being targeted, what occurs in one won't lead to the other being in a better place, because no intelligence was shared between the two. This is why collective intelligence plus automation is absolutely critical. It breaks this cycle. So what does the operating model look like when you close these 4 gaps? What are the fastest defenders actually doing? Brandon, walk us through it.
Yeah, so we've talked about what's happening out there, the speed, the scale, the commoditized playbooks. Now I want to shift to what actually works in practice, because the fastest SOCs aren't winning by working harder. They're winning by changing operator behavior and then automating those behaviors so that they happen consistently at machine speed. And that's the 3 operator truths I see in the fastest teams. And I want to lead with the philosophy first, why it works, then connect it, and how do we enable it. So that first operator truth, prediction beats reaction. So the philosophy is quite simple. You can't defend what you can't see. The fastest SOCs start with comprehensive asset discovery, devices, identities, applications, cloud resources, SaaS, APIs, all of it. Not as a one-time inventory project, but as a living map of the environment. So why does this matter? Because groups like Akira win by finding things you don't know you own. The unmonitored VPN appliance, the forgotten server and acquired office, the cloud workload that got spun up and never got uncovered. Unknown assets are attacker leverage. So the payoff is simple. When there are no unknowns, the attacker's easiest path disappears. They're forced into a louder, riskier moves. They have to work harder, and that creates more opportunities to catch them. So in practically, this is where something like the discovery comes in, and the continuous monitoring using a chasm-like solution. So this means automated asset inventories that stay current, clear mapping of where coverage is missing, like assets without EDR, without logging, without scanning, and prioritize remediation so you're fixing the most meaningful exposures first. And as the environment changes, cloud scales, on-prem shrinks, acquisitions happen, your visibility adapts in real time. The second operator truth, collective intelligence only works when it's operationalized automatically with AI. So here's the philosophy. Threat intelligence isn't rare. Most organizations have it coming from everywhere. Internal detections, threat feeds, peer reporting, ISACs, vendors, law enforcement, you name it. The problem is almost all of it dies in a ticket queue. If intelligence requires manual ingestion, someone reading a report, writing a rule, testing it, deploying it next week, it's not intelligence, it's documentation. So why is this so critical now? Because ransomware tactics are commoditized. What works for one group spreads fast. The same exploit chain, the same evasion trick, the same playbook, it hits industry after industry. So the teams that win are the teams that learn more before they get hit, not after. That's the payoff. You stop learning after lessons, after incidents, and you start defending it ahead of them. And the scale opportunity here is massive. Imagine if intelligence from dozens of sources was automatically turned into detections for your environment, automatically deployed across your logging stack 24/7, automatically tuned to your baselines and your tools, and shared so that when one organization sees it, everyone gets better. That's the difference between 2025 defenders and 2026 defenders when collective intelligence becomes a collective defense. The teams that are doing this well build an operating model where telemetry from every security control feeds one place, so signals don't stay siloed. They use AI-driven correlation to connect the dots across these tools. And then they're operationalizing intelligence by turning it into detections fast, signal to rule to deployment, then automatically adapt those detections to their environment so they fit their baselines and, again, their tech stack. Because it's continuous, the detections keep improving as threats evolve, without your team having to rebuild everything from scratch every time an attacker is changing a step. The last truth, autonomous response compresses response time from days to minutes. Philosophy is, again, simple. If human approval gates every action, you've already lost. The fastest SOCs don't automate decisions. They automate the execution of those decisions that they've already agreed upon. The model looks like this. Detect a threat, automatically correlate it across tools, isolate the asset or identity, collect the forensics, block the pathways for lateral movement, and then bring a human in for validation and strategy. And so why does this work? It's because groups like Clop can go from access to exfiltration in 24 to 48 hours. If your response time requires manual escalation, change control, approvals, and handoffs, you're responding on a timeline that the attacker can outrun. An automated response is also how you respond at scale. 10 threats, 100 threats, 1,000 threats. You shouldn't need to scale headcount just to execute containment steps. And what's that payoff? Imagine it's 2 a.m., a threat surfaces, autonomous response isolates the host, disables the compromised session, rotates credentials, blocks a lateral movement path, and collects all the evidence before your team even sees the alert. So your analysts don't have to be woken up in the middle of the night to threat detected, we're investigating. They wake up to threat detected and contained, here's what happened, here's what we collected, here's what you need to do next. What's really important to kind of drive home here is humans do not disappear. They shift to work only humans can do. Is that judgment? Is it real? What's the root cause? What's the business impact? What's the right remediation strategy? Automation handles the execute now part. People handle the understand and decide part. That's where agentic workflows and autonomous response can come in executing these containments and investigating action immediately and consistently without waiting for a human gate. When you put these three truths together, you get an operating model for 2026 that actually matches the threat. First, chasm-like visibility, full awareness of every asset and immediate exposure resolution. That closes the incomplete visibility gap. Attackers lose their biggest advantage, hiding in those dark corners. And once those dark corners are gone, commoditized playbooks like ones Akira rely on get harder to execute. Second, collective intelligence automation, holistic log ingestion, and AI analysis that turns shared intelligence into action. That closes a siloed intelligence gap. Now, collective intelligence becomes collective defense. What hits company A becomes protection for company B before the same playbook spreads. And last, that autonomous response, agentic workflows that execute containment without human gates. That closes the immature manual response gap. You're responding in minutes, not days, which keeps you ahead of attacker pace. And even if someone gets past detection, response is fast enough to prevent the real damage. And that's what readiness looks like in 2026. Not more alerts, not more dashboards, an operating model built for machine speed threats so your team can stay ahead of ransomware and not chase it.
For security teams and CISOs, I want to take away 3 main actions for everyone. The first takeaway is that ransomware groups win when defenders are blind. Groups like Akira hunt for unknown assets. Groups like Qilin probe for coverage gaps. If you have incomplete visibility, you're handing them the map. Full asset visibility and exposure resolution isn't nice to have, it's foundational for your organization. And because these gaps are shared across organizations, being blind puts you at risk from the same commoditized attack playbooks everyone else is facing. Takeaway number 2, collective intelligence without automation is just information. Collective intelligence only matters if it's operationalized and analyzed automatically with AI. Without automation, you're learning lessons after the attack, not before. And the final takeaway is that speed of response is a competitive advantage. Breakout window is 18 minutes. If your response is manual and it takes hours or days, you have already lost. If your response is autonomous and takes minutes, you're ahead. Autonomous response isn't replacing humans. It's enabling them to focus on judgment and strategy. And at scale, automation lets you respond to 10 threats as easily as one. Here's what matters. Ransomware groups aren't going away. They're going to keep evolving. Your defense can't be reactive anymore. It has to be proactive. And proactive defense requires visibility into your attack surface and the ability to predict threats before they reach you.
So this month, ask your team these questions. Can we see everything we own? Do we have monitoring across our entire attack surface? How fast does threat intelligence become active detection in our environment? Those 3 questions will help tell you where you stand out and what needs to change. And that's all for this week. Thanks for listening to another episode of ShadowTalk. If you'd like to get in touch, we're just an email away. You can send your questions to shadowtalk@reliaquest.com. Please don't forget to subscribe so you can get next week's episode delivered direct to your podcasting platform of choice. And we really appreciate if you can rate and review ShadowTalk wherever you listen. It will make a huge difference and help us reach new listeners.